All right, so there's times to discuss teams and where they're best, and there's times to where they're ugliest. And for today's installment, in what I didn't think I was going to do as a series, but this team's been bugging me. So why haven't the Buffalo Sabres won a Stanley Cup? If you look back through their history, they've had 2 trips to the Stanley Cup final. The most important one being 1975. That's during the French Connection era. Very good team, solid team, and they lose to the Flyers. So the Broad Street Bullies playing their style of hockey, which was a little more bruising than the flying French Connection. Gilbert Perreault, of course, Rick Martin. Buffalo's had a decent history. And Buffalo, I always sort of equate kind of with Vancouver. I mean, they came into the league together, and they've both had a lot of bad luck, and yet they've had some really good teams. Of course, Dominik Hasek, 1999, gets Buffalo to the final. Buffalo didn't have the attack that Dallas did, and in the end, Dallas won that way. And I know, I hear Buffalo fans now. I honestly believe that once this gets posted, the skate in the crease is going to be the reason why Buffalo didn't win a cup. Remember, that wasn't a Game 7. That was a Game 6. And Buffalo is an organization that started to crash and burn when they decided to open up their pocketbooks. In that the team was a little bit on the downside, and then management said, all right, we're going to sign Ehrhoff for big money and Leno for big money, and all these guys are going to come in for big money, and they all crashed and burned. And it left Buffalo in a bad situation, because now, in the year of the salary cap, you can't spend your way out of a spending problem because you've spent yourself into a corner. The other issue is, earlier I talked about Washington, and the Capitals are still technically in a position where they should make the playoffs, and whether they're a Stanley Cup threat or not, we can debate. But Buffalo really isn't. Their defense, while it's been improved in this offseason, I think it still needs a lot of work. Eichel is still very young. I think it's going to take a while to see him reach his full potential. I think by the end of this year we may start to see that, but I still don't see Buffalo in a playoff position at the end of this season. So I think Buffalo long term may be in a better position than Washington to end this curse, as it were. But it's too bad, because they've really had very solid players for, Gilbert Perreault owns the record book, 1,191 games played, 512 goals, 814 assists, 1,326 points. Retired a Sabre. And I've said before, if you can have a guy there their entire career, it looks good. 92-93, the most points in a season, Pat LaFontaine with 148. That 92-93 season, let's take a quick boo at that. The Buffalo Sabres finished 4th in the Adams and lost the division final. So, LaFontaine scores a ton of points, doesn't have a ton of support. The team is 4th in their division. Scores an upset in the first round, which everybody did in 93. And then, of course, 93, that'd be Montreal that would have knocked them out. And it's really... It's a shame. I mean, Alex McGillney comes over and plays for them to start his career. We have, like I mentioned, Hasek. They stole Hasek. And they've had some very good players over the years. They've had some very good teams. I mean, we're not going to measure by President's trophies because that's a whole other headache. But they were 3rd in the East in 2010. They were 1st in the East in 2007, which was their, I believe that's President's Trophy season. They were kind of also rans before that. They were in the final in 99, as I said, and they did that as 4th in the Northeast Division, 7th in the East. So number 7 seed going to the final, which has happened before, and it'll happen again. Underdogs win, that's kind of a thing. But if they couldn't win with Hasek, it's really hard for me to project out if Buffalo wins the Stanley Cup. It's interesting, too, because right now Edmonton and Toronto fans are all excited about their future, and rightfully so. They had a fantastic season this last year. I don't see Buffalo being that far behind. I think Buffalo's got probably an issue where they need that one marquee defenseman. I think Leonard's good enough to get them into the playoffs. And I think they've got some really good young talent that they could do some damage in said playoffs. But again, when you get into Stanley Cup contender, who's a contender? Last summer, if I had said Toronto and Edmonton will emerge as huge Stanley Cup contenders within a year, I would have been mocked. Rightfully so. So, while we can look at Buffalo and say, well, they're not there and they may never get there, and there's already people saying that Eichel's overrated, which I think is crazy. If you look at points per game last year, he was 11th in the NHL. So, if a guy's 11th in the NHL in points per game, he's a pretty damn good player. And you can't overrate a guy who, with good health, probably finishes, or he does finish top 10 in scoring in the NHL in his second year. So there is something special going on in Buffalo. I think there's a lot of criticism directed at Ryan O'Reilly I don't understand, and I was never a Ryan O'Reilly fan, but he played well last year, and yet all the rag mags want to tear him apart and say he's not that great. In terms of Buffalo's place right now, it would be huge if they could win a Stanley Cup, because you've got the Bills, who haven't won a Super Bowl, and they're in much the same position. The Buffalo Bills have had great teams. Jim Kelly, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, couldn't win the big game. The difference is the Buffalo Bills lost a lot of Super Bowls in front of a lot of people. The Buffalo Sabres have been in the final twice, and they acquitted themselves rather well both times. I sometimes wonder if a healthy Pat LaFontaine had been the number one center with Hasek and net, does 99 change? If LaFontaine is healthy, 1999 he's healthy, and he's that 148-point player, and Hasek's in net, does Buffalo win out? Probably. I know that it was a good gritty run, but if you'd added LaFontaine to that team, they probably win it. These are tough, because it is really tough to call where in a team's history they went wrong. For Buffalo, they were the cheap team for a while, where they were on this really small budget, which hurt them. Then they blew up that budget for the wrong players, and now they're doing a rebuild, which was overdue at the time they started it. So you guys can let me know in the comment section below, where do you think Buffalo's gone right or gone wrong, and why do you think it is that the Buffalo Sabres have never won a Stanley Cup in the organization's history? Because there's a lot of teams that have won the Cup since Buffalo came in. A lot of organizations that are younger than the Buffalo Sabres. And I know luck is part of it, but let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.